welcome to Overtime Hockey Talk. My name is Mark Paul. My co-host Justin Baker and I are here to talk Vancouver Canucks. As we started the last show, actually, talking about the Canucks, we figured that this was going to happen, and here we are about a week later, and Bruce Boudreau is officially let go by the Vancouver Canucks, and Rick Tocchet hired as their head coach. And Justin, I just want to jump right into it. I don't even want to hear about how you're doing. I just want to hear about what you think about Rick Tocchet becoming the coach of the Canucks.
Giant fuck you.
Yeah, giant middle finger to you. I could care less about your life. And, no, I'm kidding. Love to hear about your life. But that's what we did before the show. And, I know the listeners, we will hear your raccoon story at some point on the show. For sure. We need to hear your raccoon story. But your thoughts on Rick Tocchet?
Yeah.
And the mercy fire.
Well,
of Bruce
Boudreau. that's the general consensus, right? It's a mercy fire. Listen, Bruce Boudreau was known for a week. He was going to get canned. I think, no one came. I mean, this came as a shock to no one, right? That they were replacing him with Rick Tocchet. And of course, Sergei Gonchar comes in and just, Adam Foote too.
It's like all the Penguin guys getting back together here.
Right. Basically, right. A lot of changes behind the bench. And, Rick Tocchet comes in, and my big concern is, when I heard about Rick Tocchet being the guy, my concern was, is this an upgrade, right? Part of me wants to say yes, because listen, I look at his last head coaching job, and he was with the Arizona Coyotes, and he managed to put up respectable numbers. I mean, he, outside of his, first and last seasons, those middle two, he managed to put above 500 seasons together with, in my opinion, what is a
dumpster
below average
team. Yeah.
Yeah. Below average team. So you got to tip the cap to him on that one. But at the same time, looking back at his head coaching tenure with, Tampa Bay Lightning and his first and last years with Arizona, it just wasn't the same. And so, again, he's only made the playoffs once in his career, lost in the first round to Colorado in 1920. So, which again, this is a, Arizona team that really had no right being in the playoffs in my mind. I think they were just kind of dragged along by, goaltending there, but as they often are. And so,
that was the bubble that they,
yes. Yeah. So again, expanded playoffs, which was, but again, they still managed to finish fifth in the Pacific because of, goaltending, right? You had Darcy Kemper there and putting up some beautiful numbers. But again, is Rick Tocchet the answer? Is he going to be that much better than Bruce Boudreau? And, at first glance, I'm going to say no, right? I've always been a fan of Bruce Boudreau's. I think he is a good coach. Maybe not a great coach, but he's a good coach. And so for me, I think obviously where the changes need to occur is on this roster. And so we're going to see some changes here. Jim Rutherford has obviously come out and made it abundantly clear that he is open for business. So, again, we'll see what kind of team Rick Tocchet has to work with, because to me, this year is a throwaway no matter where he finishes in the standings. So, to me, it's going to be beginning next year. What kind of team does he have? How many pieces? Who's gone, who's still there? And of course, getting a full training camp, a full season with this team and see what he does. And then I can tell you, honestly, is he a better coach, for the Canucks really is going to be the question.
Yeah. And I tend to lean the other way. I think that when you consider Travis Green, before him and then Bruce Boudreau, essentially, I'll go ahead and call Bruce Boudreau kind of he wasn't an interim coach. That might not be the right word.
Band-Aid coach.
But kind of that we'll bring him in here. And I don't think they had any intention to keep him beyond last year. And then they did so well with him in there that it almost was it would just kind of be stupid to not see what we have here. And, another season comes, and obviously it's sort of a repeat of what we saw at the beginning of last year, was this team that just is underperforming, and there needed to be a change. This time I think was much different from Travis Green, where a lot of guys just didn't like Travis Green. This time around, guys like Bruce Boudreau, the fans like Bruce Boudreau. He was getting a lot of love from the fans the other night, the night before he got fired. And I think when you look at his style of coaching, which is very lax, very very open offensively, which is great. It's really fun to watch. I mean, let's be honest, Vancouver has been, if they're not the most exciting team to watch this year, just because there's like they could blow a lead at any point. They can also come back down a little bit. Like they are very exciting in that sense, but from looking at them and going, are they going to win? You go, well, you just can't win playing that style of hockey. And I think that bringing in Rick Tocchet, he already said it, like there's going to be more accountability, and we're not going to overplay guys. Like a guy like JT Miller, who's playing, for what he said, he's basically just pacing himself, was the quote, because he's playing too much. And so I think that Rick Tocchet is going to take a little bit more of an analytic approach to this, to go, yeah, what are all of these different players' ideal minutes, and how can we roll 4 lines? And like you said, that's going to have a big part to do with what Jim Rutherford and Patrick Alvin do in terms of bringing in talent, because you can't roll 4 lines if 2 of your lines blow. So they do need to do that as well. But I think that they'll be a little bit more analytical in their approach and less emotional, which I think is kind of that's the reason why you love Bruce Boudreau. It's also the reason you go, yeah, but like if it's not the right mix of guys, then the emotional, like feel-based coaching isn't going to work, because you might have too many guys who need more structure to really do well, because the internal, I'll say, like the way that they manage each other isn't quite as efficient there. Whereas like Bruce Boudreau, I mean, he can walk into a lot of teams and make them better because he can open it up and all of a sudden is more relational than the previous coach, which is great, but it kind of has this cap on it for how long it can last. And obviously it didn't last very long in Vancouver.
Yeah. I mean, I think with any head coach, I think there always needs to be a little bit of analyticalness there that I think a lot of coaches lack, and why they often don't have success for long, right? I mean, they come in and they usually have, a quick boost in production, a quick boost in wins, et cetera, whatever.
Sure.
And they quickly fizzle out because, again, not being that analytical, like you said, managing minutes and knowing who thrives when you play them 16 minutes at the forward position versus 18 or 19, right? Those extra couple minutes might really take their toll on a player analytically, where, for example, a big coach I look at is John Tortorella. To me, he's all about structure and discipline, and he's going to play whoever is playing the way he wants you to play, regardless of how analytically you might, look on paper, right? So, to me, that's a coach who just never seems to get over the hump, outside of his tenure in Tampa Bay, obviously. But, he really hasn't been able to get to that next level with Vancouver, for example, or, those other teams
or
like
Washington,
Columbus.
Yes. You're talking about Boudreau or Tortorella?
No, Tortorella.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry. Yeah. Well, he did win a Stanley Cup in Tampa. So.
Right, but that's what I mean outside of Tampa Bay, though. Yeah. I think he just hasn't been able to get to that next level again.
I don't know. In Columbus, he was unbelievable at squeezing every last little juice out of those teams. And
I absolutely agree, and I think that only takes you so far.
He only had one. He only had one team that I would say was legitimate. Like, hey, they could win 2 or 3 rounds, and that was the team that had Duchesne and Panarin and Bobrovsky. Sure. But you're right. Well, they always ran into the Pittsburgh Penguins too.
Yeah, and but yeah, I mean, I agree with you. I think Bruce Boudreau is somebody who, at least from my point of view, doesn't have that analytical side to him that I think maybe, like you said, just only gets you so far.
Right. Yep, and I do believe Rick Tocchet is going to come in here and make the Canucks a harder team to play against, and again, he's going to play guys the correct amount of minutes and really work that side of it.
I will agree with you, and I will say too that I think a guy like JT Miller is in for a huge wake-up call here. So, with that huge contract, this might be the right coach for a guy like that who, honestly, if this is a team that's looking to retool on the fly, not necessarily go through a full rebuild. And maybe this is the right coach they need for a guy like JT Miller, who at times to me just looks like he gives up on plays and just isn't there in the game, right?
Yeah. I actually really like the way that Tocchet said it. He said he paces himself, which is such a good description, and it's I guess a more or less a little more positive way of looking at it. Like, yeah, I mean, if you're playing too much and you go, well, I can't go balls out right now, I got to play again in a minute and a half, then it it sort of makes sense. Okay, well, with that said, we do know. I mean, we've talked at length about the Canucks. We talked about players most likely to be traded, and now it is all but a certainty that Bo Horvat is going to get dealt. Along with, there's a couple other, like Luke Shen is a UFA at the end of the year. He'll certainly fetch something decent for what he is, to be that bottom pairing guy. You also have Michael Furland, who is a UFA at year's end. And then someone interesting that no one's talked about is Andrei Kuzmenko, who almost is a point per game player right now. And he is a UFA at the end of the year because of when he came over. He is a fascinating UFA to me. $950,000. I mean, it's nothing. Every team can take on his contract. And he is a definite top six forward, like a no doubt can't miss top six forward. Before we get into Bo Horvat, have you heard anything, or like, does it interest you in the Andrei Kuzmenko potential sweepstakes here?
Yeah, I mean, the only thing that I've heard is that Vancouver has pitched an extension to him because from what I've heard from Jim Rutherford, basically that they can only afford to keep Bo Horvat or Kuzmenko. Apparently, they made their best offer to Horvat, as we discussed on the show. So really, now they're coming to Kuzmenko with their offer, right? And I mean, not necessarily think he's at the same caliber as a guy like Kirill Kaprizov, but you have to kind of look at that contract and think that, he's probably looking over that way, because here's a guy that comes over from Russia, plays 1 year, has a really good year, and cashes in big time, right?
Going to definitely score 30 goals, barring injury. I mean, he's at 19 and 45 already, so you got to think, 30 goals is almost a certainty, and 70 to 80 points, which is a phenomenal rookie year. I mean, I know he's 26 years old. It's not like he's an 18-year-old kid coming in here and cleaning up, but yeah, I mean, he certainly has to have teams' interest. And it makes you wonder, you're 26 years old. You have the option to, now, I guess in fairness, he did have the option to go anywhere he wanted when he signed with the Canucks, right? So he signed in Vancouver for a reason. We have to consider that. I think, though, he was probably going, oh, well, this team's got a lot of potential. And if they get rid of Brock Besser, and you're looking at the future going, is this team really going to be... are they going to be good within the next 2 years? I don't know. I don't know. It seems like we've come back with this team over and over. You're going to lose Brock Besser too. I wonder if he just goes, I can leave and go sign a big deal literally anywhere I want. I am going to go ahead and trade me. And usually these are the guys who no one, they don't talk to anybody because they can barely speak English.
Yeah, it's a tough one, right? Because if you look at it from just a standings standpoint, and you say, okay, cool, well, Seattle's seemingly getting their act together now, and they've got two superstar centers in the making between Matty Beniers and Shane Wright, so they could be set for a while. LA looks like they're reloaded for the future, and Edmonton is Edmonton, and Calgary's always, in my opinion, as long as Suter's there, they're going to still be in the mix. So is it a division maybe he wants to hang out, and maybe he wants to go find another team where, they're already the cream of the crop, or they're already sitting at the top, like a New Jersey, or maybe, a Carolina, because look, for example, Carolina just lost Pacioretty for the year, so they could certainly use a goal scorer like this to come in and play in their top six every single night. So, again, I think there's going to be opportunities on other teams that are at the top of their division that aren't struggling to figure out their identity and struggling to compete with teams that, in my opinion, have already solidified their spots at the top of the division. So, to me, it makes more sense that he's going to re-sign or sign somewhere else versus re-signing with Vancouver at this point.
Yeah. Sideline, how rough is that Pacioretty, that he's out for the year now?
Oh, 5 days back, and he re-aggravates his old injury.
His Achilles. My goodness, it just sucks for him because he's a great player to watch. He's a good goal scorer. I will say, I mean, Carolina's done what they've done without him. So in some respects, it's not as if they're desperate for him. Now you're never going to turn down a guy who can get you 30 goals in a blink, but it does open up some interesting cap space for Carolina. And Carolina's not about to go trading for any of these guys who are UFAs at the end of the year. Like, I can guarantee you Carolina's not trading for Kuzmenko because they are very stingy with their resources. And that Kuzmenko is if Kuzmenko leaves Vancouver, he's probably going to go for the biggest deal that he can get, is my guess.
I have no doubt about that. Yeah.
And I don't think Carolina's not giving anybody more than what Aho got. And I mean, they're especially not giving a guy who's done it once in the NHL. They just don't have that vibe to them, where they're just going to pay for the next big shiny toy. They are very analytical in exactly how much money they'll give a player. And that is probably why oftentimes UFAs don't go to Carolina because of their stinginess. But hey, they're good. But yeah, New Jersey, man, Kuzmenko fitting up there with playing with Jack Hughes or Nico Hischier, adding that little. I mean, they have a nice offense, but just adding that extra speed and those hands up there. I can't see a team not being interested in Kuzmenko outside of Carolina. Would be the one team in the East that I go, they usually don't take rentals. But what a pull that it would be for a Pittsburgh or a Washington where you've got Ovechkin to maybe lure Kuzmenko over. They've got a lot of Russians on their team, and that certainly has been a pull in the past.
Yeah, speaking of Russians, there's another team, Florida, I think, that could potentially make a move. They need a lot of help right now. And, Barkov there, Bobrovsky, I think, there's that Russian connection in the South. And, those Russians seem to like South Beach for whatever reason. So it wouldn't shock me if that's another team that you could really, count as a potential landing spot for Kuzmenko.
Okay. Let's go to Bo Horvat because I know we have talked about Bo Horvat a little bit already, but I think we've got you picked a couple landing spots you think he's going to go to. I picked a couple as well, and we're going to dive into a couple potential real trades that will work. Do you want to start with the Red Wings here?
Why not?
Okay.
My fave.
And this is a confirmed rumor of, hey, Yzerman's kicked the tires here on bringing in Bo Horvat. And from what I hear is only if they can't re-sign Larkin. For whatever reason, I mean, when you consider that Dylan Larkin's been on the Red Wings for his entire career, and it's pretty obvious to me what he would sign for, it seems as though there is a little bit of a stalemate because nothing's really been said. We're kind of just sitting here waiting, and it seems like they're not making any progress, which is probably why you're starting to hear stuff about Horvat because they're trying to put pressure on Larkin.
Yeah, I mean, why not, right? And that's, let's look at Steve Yzerman's last big, free agent center signing, it's Steven Stamkos. And, you look at what happened with that situation. He literally went down to, free agency and then re-signed. So, again, I won't count the Red Wings out as long as Steve Yzerman's the GM. And listen, I mean, Larkin is a homegrown guy. He grew up here in Michigan, and so he knows. I'm sure he values wearing the C in that Red Wings sweater a lot more than maybe some other guys might. And so, ultimately, I think a deal will get done, but I still don't think that, puts the kibosh on as far as, looking at a potential Bo Horvat trade, because if you're Detroit, I've been saying that the one thing they've been missing is a 1-2 punch at center. And so if you can get a Bo Horvat to come in and center that second line, obviously Andrew Kopp has been okay. Hasn't been great, but he's been okay. I mean, he's been doing great on the penalty kill. He's just maybe lacked a little bit offensively as far as those numbers are concerned. But I do think, with Kopp being able to shift over to the wing very easily, if you brought in a guy like Bo Horvat, he could fit in nicely on that second line, and you could, move Kopp, maybe on that second line or push him down to the third line at times and give him opportunities to succeed a little bit more. So And especially with Tyler Bertuzzi being a question mark, and who knows if the Wings are even going to re-sign him or just let him walk at this point. So, Bo Horvat could fit in nicely and add that little bit of grit that I think Bertuzzi would typically add.
And what do you think it'll take to get him?
So realistically, again, I think the Red Wings are only interested in Horvat if they can re-sign him. So to me, it's got to be a sign and trade, which typically can be. Well,
apparently they're not giving permission to teams to talk contracts with him.
No, not at all. Because typically what happens is, and I can't remember what TSN Insider I heard it from, but usually what happens when you give teams permission to talk to their agents or talk to the player ahead of a trade, you're almost giving more leverage to the player versus the actual team. And I think in this case, Vancouver wants to keep all the leverage because they know they've got to get the maximum out of this deal, right? So to me, I think the one big piece and starting point, regardless if you're going to do a sign and trade or just trade for him as a rental player, I think Vancouver's looking at a big piece on D right now. I think they've got enough up front to work with, and they can go and retool and get other pieces in here through free agency. But I think the tough part is always finding good pieces on the back end. And listen, you've alluded to, or we've talked about before how OEL and Tyler Myers just haven't really been the answer for them, and they're obviously going to trade probably their second best defenseman in Luke Shin right now. So that's going to leave a big hole. And so for me, I think a starting point for Detroit would be Filip Hronek. I think with the emergence of Edvinsson on the back end coming up, I think they've got another realistic number 3 defenseman in the making, and they've got some other decent defensive prospects down there that I think they've got enough where they can afford to part ways with a guy like Hronek, who is going to be doing extension next year anyways, and is going to get a raise from $4.4 million. So for a guy who is going to be an RFA and is coming in at 4.4. Vancouver can obviously afford him. So I think that's a starting point for Vancouver. And then I think on top of that, they're probably going to want another roster player because, again, they've said it. They're not looking to rebuild. So I think, draft picks and prospects are really the secondary pieces for this kind of a deal. And so I think you're going to look at a guy like Joseph Veleno who can add in, at the center position on maybe your third or fourth line. He's serviced Detroit well on the fourth line and slots up in the third. He's a good penalty killer, a good faceoff guy. So, he could chip in a little, offense here and there. And at 23, he can still develop. So I think with Hronek, Veleno, and then you obviously probably have to throw in a first round pick here to get it done at a sign and trade.
Yep.
I think that could realistically get it done for Detroit.
Yeah. Do you think maybe they would take your 2024?
Yeah, I do. I really do. And I think Detroit knowing, I think there will be conditions into that, especially Detroit knowing that they're not going to be competing for a playoff spot, that they're likely going to be in the lottery. I think they're obviously going to probably say, hey, if we make the playoffs, then yeah, you can take the 2023. But if we miss, we're shifting that to a 2024 or top 10 protect or something like that.
Yeah. Now, okay, all fair. Why would the Wings trade Veleno and Hronek and a first when they know in the offseason they could just go and sign Bo Horvat at free of charge?
And I think that's why I mentioned the sign and trade part of it, because if you're not super confident that you can get Dylan Larkin signed, I don't think you want to go into next offseason, lose Larkin, miss out on Horvat, and potentially be stuck in this middling ground now where now you have to decide, do we have to go through a whole entire another rebuild now because we just lost our number one center and potentially Tyler Bertuzzi, another top 6 forward, is going. Realistically, right? So Detroit, looking at the center position, they've got Marco Kasper that they drafted this past season, and I think he's a quality centerman, but is he realistically going to be a top 6 center? I don't know yet.
I think so. I mean, at 6 overall, you gotta hope your guy's going to be a number, or 8th overall. You got to be confident that a guy's going to be a top 6 forward right there.
Yeah, that's the expectation. But to me, he's not a Matty Beniers or a Nick Suzuki who can come in, I think, right away. I think it's still going to take another 2 or 3 years for this kid to develop. And so, again, not knowing that and wanting to basically not take a step backwards, if you're making a move for a guy like Horvat, you're getting rid of those big pieces like Hronek and Veleno, knowing that you're doing a sign and trade and you're going to keep Horvat around long term because, if Larkin does leave for any reason, when you bring in Horvat, you're not necessarily taking a step backwards. You're still, basically in my mind, those are comparable pieces.
You got to wonder, does a trade for Bo Horvat actually embolden Larkin to re-sign?
Why wouldn't it, right? Because you get another piece that's taking another step forward in the rebuild.
Right.
And you're saying, we're for real. We're committed to this team. And not only that, too, I think it's, another reason Detroit would do a sign and trade is because you also want to bring in Horvat's cap hit and say, you know what, Larkin, here's what he's being paid. We'll give you just a little bit more than this guy because we think you're comparable players.
Yep. Although this season, Horvat's scoring goals like mad. So I do wonder what will happen now that Gabby's left and you've got a new head coach in there who's obviously going to have a little bit more devotion to defense. I do wonder if his numbers slip because of that.
Yeah, we'll see. And then that might, that's exactly why I think you're going to see a Horvat trade happen sooner rather than later, because if he goes the next 30 games and only puts up 15, 18 points because, again, commitment to defense, teams aren't really going to dish out a first-round pick for someone like that.
You're going to have teams will dish out a first, but I think you might have teams go, look at, he's now that you guys are playing quote-unquote the right way, now look, he's more or less a second-line center.
Right, exactly.
So now all we're going to give you is a first. But yeah. Okay, so I do think there is certainly a possibility of Horvat going to the Red Wings. I like the move. I think that it makes sense. The team that I feel like maybe the best fit because of the now and the future is the Boston Bruins. Boston Bruins are, you of course have Patrice Bergeron, and Bo Horvat doesn't touch Bergeron's defensive abilities. But it would be great for Patrice Bergeron to have another center who can really take a big load, take a lot of minutes. I know that they also have David Krejci, but going down the stretch too, there's something to be said about being able to go, you know what, Krejci, you can take this night off. Bergeron, you can take this night off. Like there's some benefits to it, but also you got to be thinking long term. Bergeron and Krejci are not going to be here forever. And if you toss in Horvat to this mix, he is a slight step back from the ultimate Patrice Bergeron of maybe like 3 years ago. I'd say that they're at least comparable now, and probably Horvat is at least the better point producer than Bergeron is at this point in his career. Bergeron putting up 37 points in 46 games right now. He's he's dipped below that point per game kind of player that he was 3 or 4 years ago. So you add in that extra offense. Suddenly you look at those three centers and you see a team that absolutely could win the Stanley Cup. And to me, that is like Boston's going to go all in. They'll happily trade their first round pick. And as far as what else would be included, I wonder if, how many picks it would take to grab Horvat, because I don't know that the Bruins are going to want to give away too much in terms of their full roster. I mean, there maybe was a chance that last year that they would have dealt some of their roster players, i.e. Jake DeBrusk, but right now Jake DeBrusk is on LTIR, and he actually is having a really great season, but that could be a player that they throw in there. And I don't know if he still wants a trade, but it would certainly be, I know that his dad's out in Calgary, so there's all that, like that side of it where, DeBrusk would be I would take Horvat over DeBrusk. We'll say that. But a good piece to throw in for a team that is actually looking to continue to compete. That's probably the hardest thing about Horvat, is that you actually have to trade roster players for what Vancouver wants, which that's going to be difficult for a team that is poised to win the President's Trophy. Like, that team isn't dying to give away a roster player. Like, they're not going to be jumping at trading Charlie Coyle for Bo Horvat, you know, and Charlie Coyle has all the no move clause and stuff too. But that, I guess, would be the toughest part about it for the Bruins, is that they could load on the draft picks, but it would be more difficult to grab an actual roster player from this team. So that might give the edge to Detroit. But I just think Boston probably would be a team that would look at this and see a huge opportunity to win the cup.
Yeah, I mean, assuming Detroit, right, re-signs Larkin, I think long-term wise, Boston would be a more ideal spot as far as a team that I think is more desperate for a center long-term than a team like Detroit, right? So obviously, assuming Larkin re-signs, they've got their number one center for the next 8 years, and Boston does not, right? And I don't really even see anybody in the prospect pool that I think is coming up in the near future. So, hey, maybe Boston misses out on Bo Horvat and goes and signs Ryan O'Reilly this offseason and just kind of, tries to Band-Aid it for the next few seasons. But, to me, I think, again, I've looked at Bo Horvat and, looking at who he's played with on his wing, he's mostly had Brock Besser, Connor Garland, guys that are okay wingers. They're top six guys for sure, but, maybe not Connor Garland. Maybe he's a middle six guy. But, can you imagine Bo Horvat, maybe you think his numbers might, go up even further if he gets to play with Pasta or Taylor Hall. I mean, those are two quality setup men and guys that know how to score goals. So that might be a boost for his career.
Almost seems more realistic that they would sign him in the off season.
Yes, I would agree.
For that reason, but it'll depend on what teams are willing to give up. I think it'll probably depend on the next team that you have on what they're willing to give up.
Ooh, that's a good question, right? So for me, my other realistic fit outside of Detroit is the Colorado Avalanche, and I know we've been watching them slowly claw their way, back up in the standings a little bit here. They're quietly sitting at 53 points, so they're fighting for a playoff spot. They've won 5 in a row, so I think this could be maybe that little extra push they need, and to get a guy to come in and play that second line center spot would be ideal. I mean, JT Compher's looked all right as of late, but can he sustain this kind of success long term and all season for this team? I don't know. I think he's better suited, probably slotted in on the wing or at that third line center spot. So, to me, I think for an easy starting point, and mostly pretty much a starting point, I think for almost any team that Vancouver is going to deal with, is looking on defense. To me, I think, Colorado's blessed with a lot of players on defense that they can move. Not necessarily guys that they want to move, but they have the availability. They have a lot of top quality players, between Bo and Byram, who I think is off limits, obviously. Unfortunately, Josh Manson has a no trade clause, so he gets to put a 12-team list in beginning in 2024. So maybe this is the time to move him, but I don't think, Vancouver's going to be too interested in him. But to me, an ideal player to really send back the other way would be Samuel Girard. I think this is a guy who can play on both the left and right side. I think Vancouver would be eyeballing him very, very hard if Colorado came a-calling and said, hey, we're interested. This would be the guy that I would start with, right? I would start with Samuel Girard and say, this is who I want coming back. And then really, I think maybe you look at, another prospect, for example. I think you could look at Shane Bowers, a lower level player, a guy who, could eventually turn into something maybe in the next year or two. I think.
Yeah, you take a flyer on somebody kind of vibe, right?
Yeah. I mean, he's been all right in the AHL the last few seasons, and maybe he might turn out to be a good fourth or third line center for you. But, I think Samuel Girard is a starting point. And then, of course, I do think you got to throw in another pick there just to entice, Vancouver. And so because, again, they don't have, outside of a couple players on defense, when you talk about Samuel Girard or Devin Tays, I don't think there are a lot of other options at the forward position that you're willing to part with right now. Just because of one, guys like Valeri Nichushkin and McKinnon obviously aren't going anywhere, and same with Mikko Rantanen. So really it comes down to guys that, have some term too, because their only other forwards that they might want to deal, don't really have much term on them. So
yeah, I mean that Gerard, man, as tough as it would be to give up Samuel Gerard, and it would be tough to trade him. The fact that Bowen Byram has been going so well, he looked, he's still 21 years old. He's going to get better, but I know you're thinking you want to try and repeat here and then. That would be the tough thing to trade Gerard, and they've just struggled to really find that second center position. And man,
yeah, and
Samuel
maybe you
Gerard,
make a move. Maybe you make a move though if you're Colorado, where you send your first round over, but maybe you send a third or maybe even a second round pick, down the road. I mean, I know Colorado doesn't have a lot of, draft capital as far as picks are concerned, but maybe you try to make a play where you can get Luke Shen back coming the other way. So you do kind of replace that emptiness that Samuel Girard's going to be.
Fascinating. I actually really like this deal. If you go Horvat and Shen, and you go Samuel Girard, Shane Bowers, and I mean, you're definitely going a first, and then maybe you're talking like a third round pick in 2025.
Right.
I mean, it would be tough for Vancouver. You get a guy who's got 4 years left on his deal at $5 million, and Colorado has to re-sign Bowen Byram at the end of the year. So that's, I mean, not that Bowen Byram's not going to get paid a beast of an amount, probably a $2 million deal, 2.5 maybe in there. But you're still going to have to pay him, and then that actually leaves you room for maybe bringing in a veteran until Byram fully matures. Oh, I really like that deal. That's I'll give it to you. That's one of the best ones you've ever come up with, I think.
Oh,
so well thought out. Damn. Oh, I wish I thought about things that well. By the way, do you remember? Here's a piece of trivia for you. Who was the last captain to get dealt at the trade deadline?
The last captain?
Last captain to get dealt at the trade deadline.
That is a good question.
Or I believe he would be also just the last captain to get traded, other than, I'm not going to count Shea Weber because he was injured and he wasn't coming back. So we're not going to count that. We'll go ahead and say he wasn't really the captain anymore when he was traded, because we all knew that he was going to be injured. But who was he's the captain one day, and the next day he's on a different team because he was traded.
Oh man,
I'll give you some time. I'll give you some time to consider it and to think through the teams. And I'll. Are we good on Colorado? Do we like that move? I mean, I'm taking that move all day.
Yeah,
I might try to squeeze you on something else, but I like that move. The other team that I think could come out of nowhere, and often does come out of nowhere at the trade deadline to make a big splash, is the New York Rangers. I know that they signed Vince Trocheck to a big deal, and they of course have Mika Zibanejad, who probably, for my money, is the most underrated number one center in the NHL. I mean, the guy's 22 goals in 47 games. I mean, he's on pace for another 40 goal season like he had in 1920, and he did that in 57 games though. But Zibanejad's buzzing along, and I know they have Philip Hedl, who can play the wing as well. Trocheck can play the wing as well, and that is why I'm considering bringing in Bo Horvat, because I think they have the roster capital to be able to bring him in. I don't know which one you trade, but I wonder, can you go, we'll give you Capo Caco, or we'll give you Alex Lafreniere? Straight up, nothing else. Take go balls out and make that move. And if you're Vancouver, would you be willing to trade Horvat straight up for Lafreniere?
Oh, for Lafreniere? Absolutely. If it's Capo Caco, I need more, for sure. I need a second at least to go with that. But Lafreniere, I'd be willing to take a flyer piece for piece, I think.
Scored 21 points so
throw me
far.
Throw me a prospect with Lafreniere.
No.
I got to get something else.
We'll send you Lafreniere, and that's it for Bo Horvat.
Oh, boy.
Are you going to get I'll say, are you going to get more potential from any other deal just, hey, yes, I know that some other teams can go, well, we'll give you this guy who's like a third line player, and we'll give you this. You can get a lot of depth. Certainly you could acquire depth if that was your goal, is just to acquire depth. But here you are, you could potentially have a first line player. Now there's a lot of risk in this for the Rangers too, because they lose out if, Horvat doesn't sign with them, or Lafreniere goes and becomes a superstar, right? Which is why they won't make this trade in real life.
Sure.
Because they'd be too afraid of that. And he's only a third-year player. There's certainly a little bit more time here to give to him. But, I think it's a trade that would be hard not to consider on both sides. Because if you look at the Rangers, to go, hey, look, Lafreniere could turn into a really good player, but you could win the Stanley Cup this year. You've got the pieces. And if you add Horvat to this mix, you have a beautiful mix of veterans up front who could win the Stanley Cup. And maybe Horvat comes back and signs here. Maybe he doesn't. But you maybe take your gamble here.
So let me ask you, if you're the Rangers, do you take your shot at Horvat early, not knowing what's happening with Patrick Kane, or do you wait and see what's happening with that situation now? Oh, and to answer your question earlier, I'm going to say Claude Giroux was the last captain to be traded. So,
yes, I guess he would. Yes, he would have been last captain to be traded. I forgot about Giroux. Dang it! You beat me on my own trivia question. I was going to say Nick Foligno.
Okay, nice. I like that one too.
Also a captain who was so other than all right. Yep, you got me. It is Claude Giroux, because that was last year. So, and Nick Foligno was the year before.
Yeah, I almost forgot about it. I was trying to go back purposefully in my mind, and then I'm like, no, I think someone big got traded last year, and then it just hit me. So,
dang it! Oh man.
But anyway, so back to my question, I guess. Are you anticipating Kane coming to New York, or do you, if you're the Rangers, not sit around and wait and try to pull the trigger now, per se, on a guy like Horvat before another team? Because, I do think he's not going to be around that long as far as, being a Canuck is concerned. I do think teams are going to try to pull the trigger quickly on a guy like this.
I want Horvat more than I want Patrick Kane.
Okay.
I'm willing to say it. I don't like this injury that Kane has. It would scare the living hell out of me. I don't think I'd make the move for him. But Horvat, I know he's healthy. I know he's going to produce. And I know he's going to be a great playoff producer. Like, he plays that game very well. So I'd be taking Horvat. But no, if it doesn't happen and you lose out on Horvat, is Patrick Kane is he a horrible second option? No, but I would be very scared to bring him in because of that injury. There's no way I'd give a Lafreniere. I would give up a first round pick for Kane, but that's probably it. Maybe a first and a third kind of vibe. It's just too risky to give up a player who, has that kind of potential.
Sure. Yeah, listen, the Rangers. I will say the Rangers have always had a little issue with their 5-on-5 play, and I think Horvat would go much, much further in the way of solving that than a guy like Patty Kane would, for sure.
That's a great point.
But man, the question is, obviously, I think regardless if you're Vancouver, I think the starting point is Capo Caco or Alex Lafreniere. And so, who are you willing to give up? And are you willing to give up either one of those guys? And, again, for a potential rental, right? A guy who could just, split next season. I know the Rangers, will have $16 million cap space next year, but, you got to go out. You got to find a backup goaltender. You got to give Keandre Miller a little bit of a raise. So he'll need a couple extra $1 million. Sammy Blaze Lafreniere is going to need a little bit of a raise. So Phil Petel needs a raise too. And so, they might not have, I doubt they'll have the money to really give Horvat the numbers he's looking for. So, as a Rangers fan, he's a rental. He's pure and simple.
Yep. Yeah. But I like the addition to this team, but I still got to give it to that Colorado deal would just be fire. Okay. Anything else we want to touch on before we ditch out of here? I think I hear my daughter smacking at the door. I don't know if you can hear too. That.
Yeah, I love it though.
Yeah.
I do want to ask you though, because we have seen a head coach terminated this week, and I'd love to know your thoughts on who you think potentially the next head coach to go is going to be.
Yeah. My thoughts have been on DJ Smith.
Yeah.
But I don't think that that's going to be a mid-season firing if it happens at all. They may be willing to give him one more year. So, but this was kind of supposed to be that Senators year. And things have just gone really weird there. Really weird year. As far as somebody who could get fired right now, geez. I'm gonna. This is a little weird. I'm gonna go ahead and say that no head coach is gonna get fired for the rest of the year.
Wow.
Which is very un-NHL like. But I think a huge reason why may be that these teams don't want to pay two coaches.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you. I think that, you don't want to end up like Vancouver and you're paying three different head coaches this year. But part of me thinks, I look at the teams at the bottom, right? Ottawa, Anaheim, teams that potentially could have a head coach that gets terminated at some point. I think right now, maybe they're looking at it and they're saying, you know what? Let's keep tanking a little bit because we got Connor Bedard and we got a really, really good draft class coming up that's really top heavy with some really good talent up there. So,
plus like Anaheim's been better, right? Like
sure,
through their first 30 games, they had one regulation win and now they have 5. So they're playing better. They're not good, of course, by any means, but they're playing a little bit better. Chicago's tanking on purpose. Yeah, all these teams are tanking on purpose. So it's not as if this is what you probably have gone to your coach and go, I mean, make this as interesting as possible, but we know we're not giving you the horses. The only other guy that I could see, I don't know that the Blues would be ready to part with Craig Berube yet.
I was thinking that name too, honestly.
But that's the one team that has really not met expectations this year. So that would be, maybe that's the one team that I would point to. But to me, it just doesn't make any sense because this is his first year that they've struggled and not made the playoffs. Sure. So I feel
But I will say the one reason why I do think he could get canned, though, is potentially because you're only sitting 4 points. Well, 6 points out of a wild card spot right now. And when you're going to lose potentially Tarasenko and Ryan O'Reilly at the end of the year, I think right now you kind of have to go all in if you're thinking playoffs. And so, maybe making a change now kind of, lights that fire. And, maybe you give it a couple more weeks or whatever and see how things
bring in
turn
Mike
around.
Babcock. Bring in Babcock, or who else could you bring in on just a short term? Bring in Bruce Boudreau.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, bring him in and be like, boys, you guys are just going to go wild. Oh, no. Well, Vancouver would do it because Boudreau would, his contract would be nullified.
That's very true, actually.
Vancouver would do it in a heartbeat. But yeah, I just don't see St. Louis doing it because I think it almost would be unfair. Like, I mean, hey, you almost won in the first round last year against the Stanley Cup champions. And then, yeah, you have a down year, mostly because your captain is playing like absolute garbage, and that's not really on him. And he's been hurt, and Binnington's been terrible. And I just think that, maybe this team needs a little bit of a refresh, but I don't know if that comes from the head coach position quite yet. Because he's not that far removed from winning a Stanley Cup. I guess, what was it, 2019 that they won the Cup? Yeah, 2019.
Yeah, not too far removed. So
it was the last non-COVID year, right? So, yeah. Other than that, I don't see any coach that would get fired. So.
Okay.
All right. Well, there's our show. You can find us on Twitter at OT Hockey Talk. Feel free to subscribe to the show. We love that. And let us know what you think. Justin, I don't know what else to say. But I hope you have a great rest of your night. And, oh, crap, you have to tell us about the raccoon. I almost forgot.
Oh, boy.
You have to tell us the raccoon story.
I'll make it quick. Yeah, so Saturday night, the wife and I are working on the house. I'm in the crawl space installing new PEX lines for our waters. And, boy, out of nowhere, she just starts, like, screaming and just mumbling words. And finally I get it out of her. There's a raccoon that had basically, like, fallen its feet had gone through our ceiling basically. And for those who don't know, we're under construction. We don't have drywall on half of our ceiling. So she sees this big fluffy tail and raccoon feet, and she just starts losing it. And over the next couple of days, we're setting a trap, and we managed to catch ourselves yesterday. We caught ourselves a raccoon that had wandered into the trap and taken the bait, and we basically set it free. So that was a lot of fun.
I like that between the two of us, we've caught 11 squirrels and a raccoon in the last month. Yeah.
And my favorite part was because this thing was in the attic, and the attic access wasn't that large for this big raccoon trap. I don't know if anybody listening out there has dealt with one of these things, but they're rather wide. They're a couple feet wide, and so they're difficult to get in and out without him basically moving around a lot and then causing me to lose my balance and fall and all that crap. So basically what I did is I got a carabiner and tied some rope to it, hitched it onto the handle of the raccoon cage, and kind of lowered him down through the rafters in the ceiling. And
nice.
So, it was.
So you like fun. Mission Impossible your raccoon down?
Yeah, pretty much.
That's wonderful. Well, there's the raccoon story, and we'll catch you guys very soon. Talk to you later.